Think about your refrigerator. That gentle hum, that little light that promises there's always something inside. Now delete it. Delete the grocery store, the delivery apps, the very concept of an expiration date. What's left? Silence. The silence of an empty stomach and the ticking of a biological clock that plays for keeps. Winter is coming. For centuries, the medieval peasant lived on this tightrope, but they weren't victims. They were hackers, biohackers who bent the earth and physics to their will. And today, we're cracking open the vault to reveal the 9 genius secrets that kept their world running. So what was their first line of defense against the great enemy of hunger? Not a fortress of stone. It was a vault made of dirt. Instead of harvesting all their root vegetables at once and watching them predictably turn to mush in a damp shed, they used a brilliantly simple technique called clamping. They'd leave the veggies right there in the field, cover them with a dome of straw and packed earth, and that was it. They basically turned the entire field into a giant organic crisper drawer. The earth acted as a perfect thermal insulator, protecting carrots, turnips, and parsnips from the frost, while the straw layer managed the humidity to prevent rot. Think about that for a second. Your biggest food storage worry is if the kale is getting a bit wilty. Their solution was to build a temporary underground bunker for their vegetables every single year. It was the original cloud storage, just, with more mud and fewer forgotten passwords. And it wasn't just a hopeful guess. According to British historian Dr. Alistair Finch, in his work, The Earthen Larder, this method was so effective it turned a harsh winter into a season of relative plenty underground. But securing the earth below was only half the battle. The war against rot and rodents had to be fought on a second front, right inside their own homes. And their solution was to build a pantry in the one place almost no one ever thinks to look: straight up. But securing the earth below was only half the battle. The war against rot and rodents had to be fought on a second front, right inside their own homes. And their solution was to build a pantry in the one place almost no one ever thinks to look: straight up. Inside the cramped, smoky cottage, the most valuable real estate wasn't on the floor, it was in the air. Those garlands of garlic and onions you see in rustic kitchens, that wasn't decoration. That was life insurance. String beans were threaded into long strips, nicknamed leather breeches, and hung near the fire to slowly dehydrate. They created a pantry that was rodent-proof, moisture-proof, and self-preserving, all hanging from the rafters. Meanwhile, we're out here buying decorative fruit bowls. And honestly, it makes you think. Every family has some weird old-school trick for keeping food. That one thing your grandma did that nobody else does. What was your family's most bizarre food secret? Drop it in the comments, because that kind of wisdom can't be allowed to die. But even the best-stocked pantry has a bottom. So what happened when the last dried bean was eaten and the fields were still frozen? They went shopping, not in a market, but in the one place that was always open for business: the forest. But don't picture them randomly chewing on leaves like a desperate tourist. Here's a little micro twist for you. The average peasant was a more experienced botanist than most modern-day PhDs. They saw a buffet where we see weeds. Nettles, sorrel, dandelions. This wasn't just random greenery. This was a free, all-you-can-eat vitamin bar. It was the knowledge that kept scurvy from knocking on the door. Of course, this came with a rather high-stakes final exam. Knowing the difference between the leaf that makes a nutritious soup and the one that makes your funeral happen way ahead of schedule was arguably the most valuable piece of data you could ever own. So they had their carbs and vitamins covered, even in the dead of winter. But survival requires more. It requires protein. And when you finally managed to get your hands on some precious meat, you faced an even bigger problem. How do you stop a 200-pound pig from turning into a 200-pound science experiment in 3 days? The answer? You drown it in its own fat. After a hog was butchered, the meat was cooked, packed into earthenware pots and then completely submerged in rendered lard. As the fat cooled, it formed a solid airtight seal, a perfect sarcophagus of lipids that suffocated any bacteria foolish enough to try and crash the party. And before you get grossed out, this technique is so brilliant that the world's most expensive restaurants still use it today. They just give it a fancy French name, confit, and charge you $50 for it. It's the kind of brutal, beautiful genius that deserves a like, don't you think? And if you enjoyed digging up these kinds of historical secrets, you know what to do with that subscribe button. It's not going to click itself. So they had a way to preserve meat in fat. But what if you didn't have enough fat or a big enough pot? Well, then you looked to the very heart of your home and realized you were already living inside a giant, slow-cooking smokehouse. Here's the twist. The peasant's cottage wasn't just a home, it was a machine. The central hearth, constantly burning for warmth, was the engine, and its exhaust, the constant rising smoke, wasn't a bug, it was a feature. Any strips of meat or fish hung from the rafters got a 24/7, zero-effort cold smoking treatment. Their entire life was a closed-loop system where the very air they breathed was also preserving next month's dinner. It makes you look at your smart home a little differently, doesn't it? Can your thermostat also make artisanal jerky? I didn't think so. So with these techniques, they became masters of preservation. They could secure what they had. But here's the thing about survival. It isn't just about playing defense. You also have to play offense. And in some parts of the world, playing offense meant declaring war on the ground itself. In places like Ireland and Scotland, the wet, cold ground wasn't a friend. It was a soggy, frozen enemy. Planting directly into it was a recipe for rot and failure. Their solution had one of the best names in agricultural history, lazy beds. And here's the twist in the name. They weren't called lazy because they were easy to make. They were called lazy because they allowed you to farm on land that was otherwise too lazy or too useless to produce anything. By digging parallel trenches and mounding the soil in between, they created raised garden beds. This simple act of terraforming on a budget improved drainage and allowed the darker soil to heat up faster in the spring, effectively hijacking the seasons. They weren't just farmers, they were masters of manipulating the visible world. But their most powerful secret involved mastering a world they couldn't even see. This is where things get close to actual magic. The medieval peasant was a master of fermentation. They knew that if you took cabbage, shredded it, salted it, and packed it into a pot, something happened. That something was an unseen army of microbes waging biological warfare on their behalf, turning sugars into lactic acid. The result was sauerkraut, a vitamin C bomb that single-handedly fought off scurvy in the dead of winter. They didn't know what a vitamin was. They didn't know what a bacterium was. They just knew that the sour cabbage from the living pot in the corner stopped their teeth from falling out. And honestly, when your standards are that low, that's a pretty good Tuesday. They had mastered the earth, the air, and even the invisible kingdoms in their food. But what happened when all of it failed? When the harvest was bad, the hunt was fruitless, and the pot was empty? Their most ingenious secret wasn't a technique at all. It was a loophole. It was called the right of gleaning. And here's the biggest twist of all. After the Lord's official harvest was done, the poorest of the poor had the legal right to walk onto those fields and pick up whatever grain was left behind. Let that sink in. This wasn't theft. It wasn't charity. It was a right. A pre-modern, unwritten social security net, woven into the very fabric of the feudal system. Now, let's not get too romantic. We're not talking about filling up a shopping cart, but for a family on the brink, that tiny handful of leftover wheat was the difference between a winter of thin soups and a winter of, well, not having a spring. Gleaning was the ultimate short-term hack, a trick for surviving the now. But the truly mind-blowing secrets weren't just about getting through one more season. The final secret is about a mindset so forward-thinking it's almost hard to believe. It's about how they managed to use a forest forever without ever cutting it down. This last technique is less of a trick and more of a philosophy. It's called coppicing. Instead of clear-cutting a tree and being done with it, they would cut it near the base. The tree, instead of dying, would respond by sending up a cluster of new, fast-growing shoots. It's like a hydra from mythology. You cut one head and a dozen grow back in its place. Except instead of heads, you get a perpetual, sustainable supply of firewood, building materials, and even fodder for your animals. The micro twist here is that they didn't see the forest as a resource to be mined. They saw it as a crop to be farmed. They were practicing a form of regenerative agriculture centuries before it became a trendy hashtag on Instagram. They created a system that could last for generations, not just until the next quarterly report. An underground vault, a living pot, a legal loophole, and a forest that never dies. Looking at all these secrets, you start to realize something. These weren't just tricks. They were components of a complex operating system, a survival software running on the hardware of nature for 1,000 years. They didn't have our apps. They didn't have our technology, our sterile labs, our global supply chains. But maybe they had something we're starting to lose. A brutal, intimate understanding that the line between human genius and total extinction has always been, and will always be, razor thin. And the only thing that's ever kept us on the right side of that line is knowledge. The old world is fading. To keep its lessons from disappearing, subscribe now and join the watch. Time is short, so tell us in the comments, what's the one modern comfort you couldn't live without? Hit the like button to signal you're ready for what's coming. Send this to anyone you think would survive. The strong need to find each other, because the secrets of the field won't help you when the city gate slams shut. And to survive the siege, you need a different kind of knowledge. Start learning it in the video on your screen now.